Hello and welcome to episode number 235 of the ETPHD Team Podcast with myself and Roslyn. Hi Roslyn, how are you?
I am very good, very good. How are you all doing?
I'm great, thank you. Have you coloured your hair? It's beautiful.
No, I think it's got lighter in the sun here. So it has. So thank you, because my sister says I need to dye my hair because there's so many grays.
Can't relate. I have many myself, but it looks great. Anna, how are you?
I am good, thank you. All good.
Great, and I was just saying you are glowing from the sun too. Not that we do appearance-related compliments on this podcast, but clearly today I'm breaking the rules, so I apologise.
Do you know what? I have to be honest though. I've got a new hair care thing. I've got new BB cream, and I think it's just working for me, and I'm really enjoying it. So I'm going to make the most of it. So thank you for noticing.
Oh, so here for that. Also here for how you both took those compliments and didn't bat them off. Everyone take note. This is how you take compliments. Thanks. Which I think is something that we can all get better at, to be quite frank. Okay. Well, one thing I sent you guys in the group last night, what I thought was quite interesting is not the right word, because I was a bit upset that I was sending you a Daily Mail article. But last night I was on Daily Mail because sometimes I look to see, I think it's important to see what the information out there is, right? And whether that's on a crappy podcast or whether that's on, not a crappy podcast, whether it's a crappy opinion on a good podcast, usually that's the case. Or on Daily Mail or something. I'd like to know so that I can use it for content or we can talk about it. And it was interesting that the headline for this article was fashion retailer Warehouse has ad banned after advertising watchdog ruled the model it used was unhealthily thin. Did any of you two see this?
I did. I looked at what you sent,
Yeah.
and
The comments. You said look at the comment section, and I had a field day in those comments. It was really I thought like divided comments. Like I'm quite extreme divided, like two ends of the scale.
It's wild, I think, because it's people, it ranges from people saying, well, I'm this then and I'm healthy. There's lots of that, as if, and to, as much as comments in the Daily Mail section is probably something somewhere that you never really want to go. I was just intrigued as to like what the general consensus was. And a lot of it was people saying, well, I'm that thin, right? So it's like, okay, well, great. In some way, what you're saying is you can't tell how healthy someone is from the size of their body. But then on the flip side, then people, it's always weight stigma comes into it. And then people thinking that, well, this is weight, they don't use these terms. It's the Daily Mail comment section, but it's like suggesting that it's weight stigma against a thin person. But weight stigma is what's the best way to articulate this? You experience weight stigma if you're in a larger body, not in a smaller body. You may well be shamed if you're in a smaller body by like skinny shaming and things like that, but that's not the same as weight stigma. Weight stigma is against an oppressed group, and you're not an oppressed group if you're in a societally normalized, quote unquote, thin body. But it was interesting. What were you going to say, Anna?
I was going to say more about the picture, and I know this sounds awful saying it, but I wasn't surprised. That to me was kind of like model, like obviously growing up in obviously like Kate Moss era. That to me, it's going back to that, isn't it? Where well, that's model thin. That's I don't know what I was expecting, because obviously I read the link before I saw the picture, and I was like, oh, interesting that's where my head went. I was like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I feel I agree with you, Anna. And I don't know, is it that because we grew up with him? I thought as well it just was a really bad angle. As in, so basically, it's a model in she's a leotard or something in a biker jacket. So one, the biker jacket's like oversized, so that gives the illusion that her upper body, you can't see her upper body, and the biker jacket's like oversized, boxy. So that is going to make her legs look skinnier, like look skinnier, like the appearance anyway. And then the way she's standing, I don't know what way she's standing. Basically, her leg is at an angle that again is going to look smaller or maybe more like defined. But maybe again, it's my brain. I was like, oh, well, probably if she moved a different way, she would just look a different shape, like a body shape. And maybe it's like, I did a post the other day about body image perceptions and pictures, and how, maybe if that was like a different angle, different lighting, her body might have looked completely different again. So it did. But yeah, what I took from the comments was the comments I read or that I found funny where people were like comparing it to Lizzo. And I was like, why are you bringing Lizzo into this? But I think you're right, Emilia. I think that's what people don't understand. The weight stigma, it's not both ends. It's not like weight stigma. I think that's why they were comparing it to Lizzo or something. And I was like, I think they're getting there, but they're not quite there.
Yeah, I just found the comment. It said, meanwhile, we have an article about Lizzo and her amazing curves, and then someone else saying, but plus size models are fine. And it's like, it's an interesting conversation because maybe she is healthy, maybe she's unhealthy. We don't know from her picture, and that's sort of the point, right? How it's interesting with this complaints procedure, the ASA, right? It's like, how have you deemed that she quote unquote looks unhealthy? And then on the flip side of that, obviously we had, the Cosmo cover a while ago of someone in a larger body and all these things. And it's like, okay, well, we need inclusion of all bodies. But the reality is there's no way of you telling if someone is healthy by the way that they look. And I think what you both said was right in the sense of that didn't look, it didn't scream anything to me. Because again, is it just that we've been completely indoctrinated into diet culture, and our magazines when I was younger, the women were all a lot smaller than I was, and that's so normalized. It's just interesting. It's like, I don't have an opinion on whether that should have been banned or not, but it does always, this kind of topic does always bring out that conversation of, this is skinny body shaming. This is like, that's what it was. They kept saying it was body shaming. And it's not the same as weight stigma. It's just interesting where this is going. This idea of like, we're trying to be more inclusive. Is it just bringing in more policing of people's bodies in a different way? Because in the past, I'm sure nobody complained about thin models when we were growing up, not to magazines and not to the extent that they'd be taken off. And I don't know. It's just like we couldn't tell if someone's healthy if they're in a larger body on the front of cover of a magazine. We can't tell if this girl's healthy in the smaller body in front of a magazine. But it's interesting that that's actually happening now, and marketing campaigns are being removed because of the size of someone's body. And I'm not sure if that would be the case if someone was in a larger body, but then those campaigns don't really exist enough. So who knows? Anyway.
I just had one more thought on it, but maybe it's like a bigger question. But it's just what you said about the ASA. Like, I didn't really know what they fully existed and what their job was. But my bigger concern is, okay, like, I feel like how many people get exposed to that warehouse ad compared to what you see in social media. And like, if the ASA are going to start and like kind of like what's reviewed those types of ads, then what about all the influencers that we had doing paid partnerships or brand deals on Instagram and TikTok? I think that's far more concerning, or like that's what I see with my clients is far more concerning. But there's no way that people can review that would take like 1 million people's full-time job to kind of like troll through what's going on in Instagram, if that makes sense. So I think I don't know, that's just
no, you're totally right. And it's the Advertising Standards Agency, and I don't know how involved they are in influencer stuff. And obviously a few years ago they introduced that rule that influencers have to put ad at the start of something if it's an advert, but like that's such a trivial part of, like, the message is still there, the bodies are still there, it's all there. Just on that note, I got an email the other day to advertise some supplement, and straight off the bat it was like, without any other negotiations, on top of this you get like $2,500 to do one post and then talk about it in your stories, and it's like for a supplement. And I obviously don't do those types of things, but it's just a reminder that there's a classic probiotic that all influencers use that I got asked to work with. And again, I don't ever work with products, and I see a lot of my influencer friends using it, and just I've had so many questions about the specific probiotic brand, and it's like, those influencers are probably getting, depending on their following, like $5,000 to talk about it. So just a reminder, when they're advertising these probiotics that probably cost you £100 a month, they've probably got $5,000 to talk about it. And would they pay for it themselves? Probably not. So that is a whole other world, and I don't know how you even police that, because you're right, especially like a brand like Warehouse, no offense Warehouse, but like it's not exactly everywhere, that marketing campaign, whereas someone with a couple of million followers definitely is. And then obviously this week we had the awful death of another bodybuilder at the weekend. I don't know if you saw this, 30 years old, who died, and it's a stark reminder. And it's not like, we don't know I don't really know the cause of his death. I think he had an aneurysm, but they've not said, it's not, we can't say it's because of his job or because of the potential pharmacological enhancements he took. We don't know why it is, but whenever a bodybuilder dies, it always is like a stark reminder for me of, this is what happens when things are so extreme. And we talk about bodybuilding obviously sometimes, and obviously Anna and I've gone through it, but sometimes I think it's trivialized quite a bit. And especially now there's like this health kick of bodybuilders say, oh, I get my bloods done, I measure my blood glucose, do all of these things. And it's like, yeah, but you're still taking exogenous substances and putting them in your body, and there's still always this risk. We don't actually know with a lot of these things. We don't actually know what's going to happen when our generation gets older, our generation that's been exposed to potentially higher rates of eating disorders, potentially higher rates of, one, resistance training, which is amazing, but two, bodybuilding, and especially more women in bodybuilding. We don't know. We're like the first generation of like a significant number of people doing these things, and it's, I mean, this guy was, bless him, only 30, but it's scary.
Do you know, I mean, similar to kind of what we're saying about the Daily Mail thing, I was talking about the bodybuilder that died at the weekend, and sent it to a friend, and the friend said, oh, I thought he'd be bigger. And you're like, okay, because again, like that, there is that idea that, like you say, we don't know for sure, but there is that idea that when a bodybuilder dies at such a young age, you're expecting someone to be a certain size, and this guy, don't get me wrong, was big, but not one of the big boys, if you like. And again, I thought, oh, interesting that's what you think is going to kind of be the cause of a death in a bodybuilder.
Yeah,
or there needs to be a certain size for it to.
Yeah. And I mean, I think from what I know, like he was somebody who maintained leanness all year round, and like was constantly kind of in that phase of what looks like a month out of prep, like a month out prep wise. So it's less about probably the muscle mass and more about like your heart and the stress on your body. And we don't talk probably enough. I was just doing some reading there about dysregulation and stress, and we don't talk that much about stress, but the physiological impact of stress on your body is huge. And combine that with the physical stress of potentially dysfunctional eating habits or overtraining or undertraining, the physiological impact of that stress combined with the physiological outcome of the psychological stress together, it can really impact your body. And I was speaking to one of my friends about this who's in her 30s today, and it's like, this is prime and some of the things were going on with her body, and I was like, this 30s is like prime time for women, where this chronic stress just starts to manifest in different ways. And when your body, especially in your 30s, does start often like communicating with you in new ways. Sorry. It's just, yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, No, it's kind of off topic, but I thought they were interesting things that came up this week. Okay, let's get actually started on the questions. Ros, do you want to go first?
Yep, so this one of Denai's clients. Can FOMO lead to overeating? So, for example, eating something when you don't really want it, need it, and how to address this.
As in fit, like FOMO over the food. Have I understood that? Or
Probably.
Yeah, yeah, because example, eating something when you don't really want, need it.
oh, I see. Yeah, I was like, it could be both. Let's be honest. It's working on that element of unconditional permission to eat, in the sense that knowing that you can have it at any time, that it's not going to go there, that you're working through the restrictions, so that yes, you might want it, but having checked in and go, yeah, do you know what? I'm not actually hungry. I'll enjoy it more when I am physically hungry for it. It's building that trust, and it does take a little bit of time that these foods aren't going to go anywhere.
I also sometimes say to my clients, like, it's okay to have a bit of grief during, like, so sometimes I really like work on your relationship with food, and you learn that, like you said, Anna, the food's gonna be there later on tonight or like tomorrow or whatever. You can feel like, oh well, past me would have did this with it, or past me would just eat that anyway, and you can grieve what your past you would have like used to do. And I think that's okay. That's just you recognizing maybe what past you did, and kind of like all the tools that you have now, and then putting that into practice for future you.
I think I said that the other day on my story, actually, because I was emotional and I was just walking around my garden outside, and I was actually annoyed. I was like, oh, mess when I could just eat and just like just not feel like this for a little while. And I was laughing at myself, because I obviously don't, like, I'd still sometimes emotionally eat like a lot of people do, right? And that's fine. But I was just thinking, a mess when I could just block out an entire day and just like not think about things for an entire day. And that's totally fine. The thing I'd say is, if I get food envy, like FOMO food from food, then I would just have a bit of it, taste it, and be like, okay, great. Like, you don't miss out if you allow yourself to have a bit of it. The difference is why can't you just allow yourself to have a bit and not all of it? And then that's often because of the unconditional permission to eat and because of the restrictive mindset. So if you feel like that FOMO of having something, why don't you get curious about, okay, well, say for example, the three of us went out for ice cream, and I didn't really want ice cream, but like you two were getting ice cream, and I knew it was like cookie dough and my favorite flavors, but I was full, I didn't really want it. Then I would say, okay, well, like, can I have, like, can I split yours, Anna? Can you get like two and I'll have a bit of yours? Or can I have like a smaller scoop of it, or something that allows me to enjoy the taste of it, get the pleasure from it, but not having a full serving that I didn't really want and I was too full to eat. There's always, like, get curious with the options that you have, as opposed to thinking it has to be, well, they're both getting two scoops with a cone, so I must have to get two scoops with a cone or have nothing. There are often options there, so just get curious around that. Anna, question.
I'm going to go with this one first because it's been full moon week. How does the lunar cycle affect our psyche? I firmly believe my body responds to the moon quite profoundly, including my menstrual cycle. How can we harness that power to prepare for a period of erratic and disturbing thoughts or feelings, and try to settle our nervous system, anything beyond meditation and a spot of yoga, but also use to our advantage? Could it be the best time to get creative, or is it to hunker down and weather the storm kind of period?
Roslyn?
I know it's great that Ros is on.
So no, there's no like papers on this, but I think there's loads of like, ancient scriptures. So there is, and I've been to the Amazon jungle and I've met some women and tribes there as well. So they say, our ancient sisters say, the moon affects the tides. So if anyone sea swims, then when there's a full moon, there's usually like a higher tide, and then there's like a lower tide. So the moon affects water, and women have a higher percentage water weight than men as well. So that's why they say that the moon affects women. And also, the moon is a 28-day cycle, and we also have a wonderful 28-day cycle. And we have our new moon and our full moon. So the moon cycle, the lunar cycle actually starts with the new moon. So it does. And then like 14 days later is the full moon. So they actually say the new moon is the time to like set intentions, like to manifest with like the new moon, to like plant those seeds. And then the full moon is actually to reflect on those intentions you set. And they actually say at full moon, did she say like hunker down? They actually say that's when you should kind of like go inward, slow down, maybe do more like yin yoga, whereas like the new moon might be more like vinyasa or things like that. Obviously, it also depends like where you're at in your cycle, but a lot of women tend to cycle with the moon. But if you don't, that doesn't mean that you're not, a witch or anything. Like that's okay. But I think like I think using the moon as a way to stay in touch with your emotions, like it's something that we like physically see. So like sometimes I'll be like, oh, it's a full moon. Oh, is it that time of the month? Like that time of the month already? Like let's do like a little check-in. Like let's check in with myself, like what's been going on for me. So if you want to get really into it, each moon is also in related to astrology. So there's like a moon in Capricorn, that it was a moon in Cancer this month, I think. So what that means is each star sign has got an element, which is like air, metal, wood, air, water, fire. And they all actually represent different meridians in our body. I could do a whole podcast on this actually. I feel like I'm gonna like.
I mean, I really think you should. I really think you should.
But basically, so there's going to be each full moon is going to be in a star sign, which is going to have certain elements to your personality, but also there's going to be element, earth, wind, air, and that's also going to connect to a part of your body. So that's where we can bring the embodiment practices in, and that's where maybe we can do some yoga, but actually like trying to like I did a yin yoga for ETPHD on Tuesday, and I did it all poses lying on our front because that connected with the stomach, which connected with the earth element. So to try and help people access that point of their body. So meditation's in that as well, but maybe what I would do around the moon is maybe doing more of a visualization meditation with the moon, like imagining the moonlight shine down into you and just seeing what comes up for you during that time. But yeah, the sleepless nights, because it was also super moon, so it's going to be brighter in the sky, so you're going to be sleepless, so you're also going to be like irritated because you're not sleeping as well. But it really is like a chance to go inward. But yeah, maybe I should just do a whole webinar on this.
I think do you know what, like with any of this stuff, it's like you're right, there's no science, there's no evidence, and a lot of scientific people will just roll their eyes and say like it's silly, and that's totally fine. But I also think there's an element of if having faith in something or having a belief in something can be really, really powerful. And very weirdly, I was again like the reading that I was doing this morning was a lot around dysregulation and stress and things like that, and there's some cool evidence around having a strong external locus of control. And what I mean by that is, you guys will know what I mean by this, but your locus of control is like where you get not your guidance from, but what's the best way to phrase this? Anyone got a better way to phrase this other than like it's basically your well, let's go with guidance, right? People who maybe diet a lot and have are people pleasers and perfectionists, etc., often have a strong external, like hold on, I've totally confused myself here. Take that part out. There's evidence around having a strong external locus of control where we believe that things occur due to fate, due to the universe, due to chance, can actually, when we have that faith, can actually help in terms of our stress arousal. So when something happens that is outside of our control, we're less likely to feel bad about it. We're less likely to feel guilty about it. We're less likely to think, oh, this is all my fault. Like, why is this me? Why am I the problem? Etc. Etc. And if you have this belief in the universe or lunar cycles or whatever it is, this religion, whatever it is that's outside of you, you become a lot more accepting of things and feel like less shame and guilt around things if things don't go necessarily, quote unquote, the way that you want. So Example might be with this: if you feel like really like you've had a really chaotic day, you've done all your usual stuff, you've time blocked, you've exercised, you've done all your usual stuff, but you just feel like you're constantly on edge today, and it's like, I just feel like I can't get on top of myself and everything just feels a little bit wild, and you go, oh, it's full moon, like, okay, and interesting, or Mercury's in retrograde or whatever, you can go, oh, okay, like, it is what it is. And I reflect, I've done all my stuff that I usually would do, it's just one of those days, like, it's full moon, this will pass. And it kind of releases a little bit of that internalization of all of these things. So if you choose to align yourself with the lunar cycle in the sense of like belief and the mindset that you approach to these different cycles, then great, it can be powerful for you in a lot of ways. And like you said, Roz, like, I like, my PhD is in physiology. I can't sit here and say, do you know what? Yes, X, Y, and Z happens and this happens. But I can sit here and say, at a full moon, I journal around like what I'm releasing, and I reflect, and I sit with myself, and then a new moon, I do set new intentions. Not every month, but I do set my intentions. I do kind of look forwards. So, and actually my period does kind of align. But I don't say it's because of some sort of scientific thing. So I think any of these things, it's like, does it support you to have a faith in something bigger than yourself? A lot of the time, yes, it does. And if we look at the research around having a faith in anything in general, it's associated with greater well-being and greater connection. And so these things do support our health. So that's why I don't like to, like, yeah, you can take from it what you want, basically, is what I'm saying.
I'm trying to find it if I can. There was a paper the BDA did actually, and it was like titled, "Is Spirituality the Missing Part of ED Recovery?" And it included like the moon and that, so it's not just religion. And I think, yeah, it just backs up everything like you said, that often we just need something greater than us, and it doesn't have to be the moon. It can be like anything, so it can be, but it just gives you that. But I thought that was that's whenever I started trying to combine spirituality into supporting people, because I was like, there is evidence that spirituality can help. It doesn't matter what it is, but as long as people have got something to hold them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's why green therapy, getting out in nature, hiking, swimming, these types of activities can be so helpful too, because it helps you reconnect with nature, but it's that reminder of, there's so many things bigger than me, and there's like the sea exists without me doing anything. The sea is more powerful than me. This world exists around me without me doing anything. And it's just that reminder of like all of these things that are bigger than us can be really helpful. And so again, yeah, like you said, it doesn't have to be the moon, it can be any of these things. Okay. Next question. This one is pretty niche, but any tips for OCD in gym and workout spaces? When I'm reactive, tired, not my best mentally, the natural dirt, sweat, and grime of gyms, gardens, bodies, etc., feel absolutely overwhelming and panicking. Hopefully, if it's OCD, you are getting support for OCD, and that is outside of our scope, in the sense of OCD requires therapeutic intervention, and you are getting support with that. That's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with what you said as well, Emilia. I suppose as well, from, I've supported a lot of people with OCD as well, with eating disorders, and can you try to regulate yourself before you go into those situations, so that you know that you're in a place where you feel that you are somewhat what you can control, if that makes sense. So before going into the gym, like checking in with yourself, like how are you feeling that day? Like, are you feeling regulated? Is there a little breath work practice you can do in the car, or a little bit of meditation, just to like bring you into a place where you feel that you can deal with whatever barriers or challenges arise for you, like in that situation on that day. That would just be my 2 cents that I add into that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think possibly, looking at your scheduling, and can you train early in the morning so that you are like, you've not had the day of stressors and the day of getting more tired and all of these vulnerability factors that trigger your OCD. Can you get in ahead of the game so that those vulnerability factors are less likely to have occurred? So it's more of a practical strategy. And of course, maybe on those days have an alternative. Can you get a couple of dumbbells and train at home on those days that it feels tough? Or can you just actually not train that day? Maybe you have a 3 full body session training program and then a couple of extra sessions for the times that you feel like great and you're ready to go in the gym. And then other weeks you do your 3 minimum, and that's fine. And other weeks, if it's really tough, then you maybe do fewer, and that's totally okay. Can you give yourself the flexibility to, on those days, go out for a walk or go for a run or do some yoga or do something different that's not in that space? Anna, question.
I thought I was aware of all the times shame shows up in my life, but I've recently realized I feel a lot of shame eating in front of others, or even just eating on my own when I'm hungry. Not just when I shouldn't, emphasis on the air quotes, be hungry, but hungry in general. I've realized I've been shaming myself internally several times a day, and it's very heavy to carry this around. For me, I think it's to do with how women are conditioned to not have needs in general, not just with food. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on understanding this.
Question. Great awareness, first of all, really great awareness. And for you, if it's shown up and you feel that it's related to that kind of shame around having needs as a woman, then great awareness also. And that won't be the case for everyone, but for sure for some women that will certainly stand true for them. So if you are someone who struggles with shame and around eating, then consider, is that maybe something that's playing a role for you? I think this is a prime example of self-awareness is great, but then what action are you going to take from that? And so the question really here is, from what I'm hearing, is like, what can I actually do to change that? How can I actually let go of that shame? And I think that one is talking about it, and you are doing that, and that's amazing. But 2 is taking the action of, okay, well, I don't want to conform to these patriarchal norms, and I want to take a stance to be a woman who doesn't fall prey to these things. So what might that look like? That might look like somebody who does a lot of activism. That might look like somebody who does a lot of reading around women's rights and feminism and equality as a whole. And that might include things like racism, weight, stigma, all of, any sort of marginalized group, and educating yourself on that and talking about these topics. And I think it's like the smaller body feminism, diet culture mess, right? Once you become a raging feminist and recognize that the female body size is not about attractiveness, it's about obedience, it almost becomes a little bit ick to you to think, okay, I'm going to get smaller if I'm already healthy, because you're like, oh, I'm like being more obedient as a woman. Like, for me personally, and I imagine everyone's journey is different, for me personally, it kind of gives me the ick a little bit to think, well, I'm just, every time I deliberately get smaller, which I've not done in a long time, but if I get smaller, is it because I'm trying to be smaller? Is it because I'm trying to take up less space? Is it because I'm trying to be more obedient? And so that comes from the education part. that came from the awareness part. So you've got the awareness part. So it's like, okay, well, can you do some reading around feminism and, you know, like everyone should be a feminist? Can you start there? Or something easier to digest, like Untamed, which is a lot more easy. It's a lot easier to read, but it does go into topics like this. Can you maybe start there and actually think, okay, can you start to challenge that narrative in your head of when it comes to eating outside of meal times or in front of other people? Can you notice those voices in your head and then create a new conversation in your head of like, either I'm not going to have this conversation and like kind of stop that thought, or can you say, okay, like I am not an obedient female, or like for like that's probably more of the narrative that's in my head, or one of the ones in my head is like I choose to take up space. And I still say that in my head when I'm doing talks and if I'm having body thoughts or anything like that. So can you create some of your own from that education and that reading that kind of challenges that narrative? Oh, it's me. It's me. It's me. I am the problem. Okay. Roz, this is one of your clients' questions. Disordered eating recovery and perimenopause and menopause. How to strike a balance? Silence is golden. You know that song?
I feel like it's such a there's so much space for that topic, so there is. And I'm like, it's me to put that onto the sheet as well. So
sometimes with questions, it's like we can all sit here and it's like I can almost visibly see it going through our brains, like just misting through our brains, and it's all sinking into us before one of us speaks. It's quite the fine. At least you know that you get well thought out answers, apart from my one earlier, which clearly was not well thought out. But in general, at least you get well thought out answers from us. I'm just going
to give a bit of context. So I think.
Go ahead, Ros.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I think there's a delay on my side. So just a bit of context. I think I know to elaborate on the question. So I think this client had a bit of emotionally gained some weight and she's sitting maybe above where her like usual set point would be, but then she doesn't want to go into she went into restrictive mode, and then that kind of led to binge eating. So she's trying to kind of now navigate healing her relationship with food, but also navigating perimenopause at the same time. So I think there's a lot of what I've been working with her is just a lot of like emotional regulation, actually, because it's a change. And like one of my colleagues was a dietitian, she's going through menopause, she speaks about it, and she's like, just imagine being a 14-year-old girl again, only this time you're in your 40s, you've got kids, you've also got older parents, you've got all these like raging hormones, but now you've got 10 times more responsibilities when you were a teenager. And I was like, oh my goodness, to me, that just makes so much sense. So it does. So, yeah, but I'm sure this client wants to hear your opinions as well, because she gets mine all the time.
Yeah, I think I did a talk on this recently, actually, to another coach's client around like major life transitions we see from the research are a key development and maintenance factor for disordered eating. And we see peak onset of disordered eating and eating disorders at these times of reproductive change. So puberty, pregnancy, and menopause. And the research around menopause is relatively sparse. Like it's just not, it's still growing around like how are there any differences in terms of how we support people during menopause and things like that. But what's really interesting is that, you know, with the menstrual cycle, we see changes in disordered eating and, like, for example, binge eating symptoms, in that they kind of parallel changes in estrogen across the menstrual cycle. So we see binge eating and emotional eating both peak when estrogen and progesterone are higher. So like that's usually just after ovulation, between ovulation and your period. There's a time when both progesterone and estrogen are higher, and that's when we often see this peak in binge eating and emotional eating. And with perimenopause, people think it's just this phase of chronic low estrogen, but actually there is a time with perimenopause where we do get estrogen dominance, and during that time, and that phase can last a while, and during that time we may see this peak onset of things like binge eating and emotional eating in association, and I'm not saying it's caused by any means, but in association with this peak of estrogen. So I think one thing to note is that it's not talked about enough, but this time of your life, like you said, Ros, it's a key time, and you're just kind of left to do it. Well, you're a woman, so you should be able to handle it now. Like when you're 15, you get excuses made for you all the time. It's like, oh, it's just her hormones, it's just she's going through this phase, and that you don't get those allowances, annoyingly, when you're a grown woman, right? So I think one thing to be really mindful of is to give yourself some grace, because a lot of the time we put so much pressure on ourselves as women as it is, but then if we're finding things really tough, and if you do have a family and if you do have kids, you can put even more pressure on yourself of like, why am I still struggling with this? Why am I still struggling with disordered eating? And I'm a grown adult. And we see this a lot, regardless of menopause or not. You know, I work with women into their like 60s, etc. And there's a lot of shame of like, why have I not got this under control yet? And there are lots of reasons why we still struggle with it for our entire lives. And during perimenopause, like it may be even tougher, especially on top of things like with perimenopause, you have reductions in often sleep quality, and you see shifts in your body, the way that your body stores your body fat. And so that can impact things like your body image and how you see yourself. There are a lot of things that can kind of add on to this already increased risk of disordered eating that make it really tough. But I think the key is really, you're obviously working with Ross, so you're already kind of doing everything that you can to support yourself. But the key part of that is that grace and that self-compassion of, I recognize this may be tougher for me right now, so I'm going to double down on my habits and do all these things. And like any time when you're working on your relationship with food, and I don't know if you said, Ross, that she had, did you say there was body composition or fat loss dichotomy there? You did. So managing your body checking is really, really important, but know that this is a transient time. And actually what's amazing is that things will start to feel easier over the next couple of months, years. Things will start to get easier. And like anyone at any point in their life, if you're working on your relationship with food and you have a body composition goal, which, 95% of our clients have a body composition goal, working on your relationship with food is part of your fat loss process, because you'll never be able to lose body fat if you haven't worked on your relationship with food. And not everyone will go into a fat loss process after they've done that, because they realize actually it's not helpful for them, and that's totally fine. But for people who do still have that fat loss goal, know that this is part of your fat loss journey, and it's important that you don't frame it as a fat loss process, because that'll actually impact your recovery. So you're not doing this to support your fat loss, but know that it is supporting your fat loss. Like, put it on the back burner. I know that sounds kind of like very similar, but you can't focus on your controlling your body if you're trying to improve your relationship with food. Done. Okay, Roz.
Questions. So this is one of my clients as well. Are there any food, supplements, or vitamins that you would recommend during an injury phase that would assist recovery?
I would probably increase your protein intake. I actually answered this on Instagram this morning. I did probably, don't know what your protein intake is, but I'd probably aim for about 2 grams per kilogram body mass per day, 4 servings of like 30 grams ish. I would be a bit intentional with having enough protein. A diet rich in fruit and vegetables for antioxidants, polyphenols, etc. Really important. Diet rich in oily fish, and omega-3. And if not, then a decent quality supplement, whatever's within your scope of accessibility for an omega-3 supplement. Creatine, even if you don't normally take it, I would start taking it anyway, and I would make sure that you continue to take that. That's a common one people kind of stop taking when they're not training or when they're injured, but actually it could potentially help in terms of maintenance of muscle potentially and or recovery from injury. And vitamin D as usual, and that's it.
Don't overcomplicate it. All the usuals really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a key kind of, people often think, well, I don't need to reduce my calorie intake because I'm not moving so much, and should I eat less? But realistically, I used to do a lot of this work with elite athletes, and when they were injured, there was like this kind of freak out of, well, my expenditure is obviously very, very high for a lot of elite athletes. And actually the expenditure that your body requires to heal from injury or illness, you don't actually know, but that is an energy expensive process that your immune system requires, and that healing process does require energy. So just because you're not going to the gym, say, doesn't mean that you don't require sufficient energy. And if you're in a calorie deficit when you're not training, you increase your risk of muscle loss. And that's not really what you want. Realistically, it takes a hell of a lot longer to build muscle than it does to lose body fat. Like, if you can do whatever you can do to protect your muscle for your health is really, really important. And so I would make sure that you are eating at least at maintenance. And I'm imagining you're not tracking if you're working with Roz, but just being mindful of making sure that you're eating regularly and you are eating sufficiently at this time. That is a priority.
Quick fun fact, whenever I was a clinical dietitian, like I'm still a dietitian, but when I worked in hospitals, whenever we'd work out patients' BMR and their activity factor, and then we'd give them a stress factor, which could range anywhere from like 5% to like 50% if they had like burns, but that also include like broken legs, broken bones, and then like, I don't know, IBD things, ICU, things like that. So I actually often talk about that with clients that have got an injury. I'm like, your body's got a stress factor. It might only be 5 or 10%, but that probably just equals out. That 5 to 10% stress factor probably equals out what your movement day to day was anyway. So yeah, it's so important. And I like calling it a stress factor, I think, because I think sometimes people just need a little Shazam, if that makes sense. And
I totally agree. I love that framing of it. Stress factor. I might actually use that and obviously credit you. I think that's a great terminology. I think also at this time, just thinking about, like, there's a couple of things of like, is this gift in my body right now, and how much is this meal gifting my body? What is this body that's gifting my body with? I think that's a really, really nice way of framing it. And remember also that you always overestimate your calorie expenditure of training. We never associate calories with weight training ever. It's a really unhelpful thing to do. But definitely in the past that was more of a thing, and people would be like, oh, I'm burning this many calories when I'm training. And it's like, realistically, in a weight training session, you're probably burning like, well, I'm not even going to say it, but it's way less than you think. Okay. Anna, question.
How long does it take you to want to crave some of the healthier coping mechanisms like journaling, meditation, going for a walk, rather than sweet foods when life is stressful? How do you address being uncomfortable with silence when you're on your own for lengths of time? I don't know if that's the same.
Yeah,
I think it's the same, like tied in, isn't it?
How long is a piece of dental floss, as usual? I was writing a post this morning about this, like, initially you have like craving, you want the cookie, you want to have the craving, you want the cookie. Well, that was the example in my post. And then over time you start to develop another coping mechanism. You're lonely, you used to want a cookie, and now you want to chat with a friend. Okay, so that every time you add in some strength to that habit loop of calling a friend, you reduce that strength of the habit loop between you, the lonely feeling, and the cookie. But over time, that will diminish even further, and the other one will strengthen even more. That just, it takes time. It doesn't take X number of weeks or X number of months. It depends how many times you strengthen that. I say muscle, it's not a muscle, obviously, but how many times you strengthen that habit loop. If you're strengthening it regularly, then it's probably going to take slightly less time than if you do it slightly less. Like that's completely normal. But remember that you are just building this new habit loop in it. And I think try and take the pressure off. When is this going to happen? Because adding that pressure, it just makes it even harder. And I think just think about putting in the reps. It's like saying, how long is it going to take me to grow a bigger arse? What does that even look like? Do you even want it? How often are you in the gym? How hard are you training? What's your stress levels like? All of these things will impact this repetition and how easy that is to do. But I think managing your expectations of, like, I don't think I ever crave. No, that's a lie. Sometimes I'll crave a bit of yoga or meditation, but if I'm really, really upset, I probably still crave a cinnamon bun. Probably. Or I'd still probably want a cinnamon bun. I don't know if craving's the right word. And I might still have a cinnamon bun. Try and remove this expectation of you're going to get to this quote unquote end point healed place where it's like, oh, I wake up in the morning and I just love to meditate for 60 minutes. And then I just love to eat have my green juice and have my this. And then I'm going to journal for 20 minutes. And then like, I'll be so kind to everyone and compassionate to everyone. There is no clear end point with any healing journey, whatever that healing journey is. And I know that whoever asked this question, like you're doing the work, like you know this, right? And I'm not patronizing you by any stretch. But I think it's important just to manage your expectations with it. I have to keep myself in check when it comes to like relationship stuff where I'm like, I'll just get to this point one day where I'm like so secure and everything will just, like, I'll know all the right choices to make and I'll be able to communicate so freely and, you know, it's all going to feel comfortable. I have recognized that that's just like another healing journey. I'm never going to get to that clear end point every time I'm in a relationship or I'm, you know, conversing. I'm actively taking steps in the right direction. And I'd say that like I'm in that space of security, but it doesn't mean that I'm kind of this healed, perfectly formed, securely attached individual. And I think the same can be true with the same is definitely true with food stuff and mindset stuff and any of this work.
I think obviously, like we all say that there is like comfort eating when you're stressed, sad, whatever it is a legitimate coping mechanism. But we all know that it's often just in the moment that it makes us feel good. And I think what can be really helpful to almost reaffirm why you're doing these things is to have a check-in after you've done your journaling, your meditation, going for a walk, yoga, whatever that is. After you've done it, have a check-in. Okay, well, how am I feeling now? Maybe you do maybe you do a stress factor like Ros was saying okay, well, I was probably like, I don't know, on a scale of 1 to 10, I was probably 10 stressed before I started, but now I feel about a 2 or a 3. Okay, well, that's why I do it. And it's almost like you were saying, it's not Emilia, it's not like you're going to crave. Sometimes I do crave journaling. I know when I need it and it does make me feel good. And sometimes maybe that's it. You almost crave the feeling after you've done it rather than the actual process of doing it at times.
Yeah, just to add to that, like you said, Anna, like you know when you crave journaling, like I know now it's from us doing these practices that we've probably been doing these for like years. I don't know. So like now we know in ourselves, like I know when I need to go for a walk or when I need to like get myself on the mat. And the reason why we just know that is because we've been where you have been, and we've just had to keep up that consistency with like, and it's also that fierce compassion that, as Amelia said, we want the cinnamon bun, but we know that actually we're going to feel better if we just get on the mat or meditate or whatever. And also reward yourself every time you do the alternative habit, like recognize that and like celebrate that and like be proud of yourself for that as well. I think that's like so important to like celebrate whenever you do have those wins.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks everyone for the questions. apologies for the random muting sessions that I just decided to put throughout this podcast. And sorry for my slight brain farts, but listen, we strive for consistent imperfection, and hopefully that is okay. So thank you both so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.